Authority had declined earlier to give the Kenya National Highways Authority the green light to proceed with this project in Aberdares, which is raising concerns with scientists right now that the effects will be irreparable, especially interfering with the ecosystem around Aberdares. Remember, this is a rich water catchment area for the country. It's a UNESCO heritage as it stands right now. And the questions we're asking, is there any political expediency that is being sought out from this particular slicing of this particular road? And as a president is becoming the beacon on the bastion of steamrolling climate change in Africa, the voice that speaks very eloquently on it, is it flying in the face of what he's trying to advocate? Because he's the one who has been in that area and has demanded that the project continues apace. So this is what we want to just focus on as we wind up on it and cross over to the borders of Sudan and discuss that particular matter. But to address this question, and I wanted just to hear also from Honorable Yusuf, if we had all these agencies who are declining and now they're flying in the face, what has changed? Because the environment is environment. Nothing has really changed as far as the impact of this particular development will have happened.
The only thing I can think of is what the two professors have said, that it is it's a popular demand pushed by political needs, and usually political needs trump environmental issues in Africa and in this part of the world. So I think it really needs to be reconsidered. If it is an ongoing project, everything possible must be made to make sure that in fact it does not create an environmental crisis. And I don't know whether that has been taken into consideration, because I know for sure that if such a political push happens, and then there are of course economic factors as well. There's always an economic benefit in doing a road project. But the question is, what is its impact on our ecosystem, and how can you mitigate that damage that would come as a result of such a decision? And then the other thing is the Aberdares is, as you have said, a UNESCO protected site. Is it likely that with a road of this kind, that this important environmental system that we have inherited would lose that status?
So I'm asking,
and
what
it
are
would
the
be
ramifications?
So I think my take on it would be to seriously reconsider the road, which is unlikely because it has been pushed by political needs. Is that we must do whatever is necessary to make sure that the Aberdares ecosystem is not damaged by this particular project.
Well, I have scruples with this, the fact that we have the executive or members of the upper reaches of government coming with these policies without or making these broadside declarations at the expense of the concerned institutions. Because if I'm the Director General, as I've mentioned before, I'll feel beholden to go with what the President is saying. I cannot fly in the face and just give a different report on the environment assessment that, Mr. President, I know you have good intentions, but this is the reality on the ground. I mean, everyone is wanting to just, as we always say, keep your powder dry, keep your job at the end of the day. I mean, that's the reality on the ground. So do you think when the executive makes such broadside declarations, especially when we have them on political rallies, they put so much pressure on this government officials?
No, but from what we've heard from the two professors who are in the know, this road has been in existence. It's a development project that is already in our planning system. It's not a roadside declaration. It may have come as a result of the political and economic needs of the people of the region. Obviously, if you are a leader of a country, you would also listen to your voters' needs. And so I wouldn't say that the agencies are under pressure or have been put under pressure. The agencies also have a responsibility to say no. I mean, if I'm a Director General of an independent agency...
They had said no.
Yes, I can say no.
That's what I'm questioning.
There's nothing that's stopping them from rejecting this particular project if it is not in the best interest of our environment. So I think you should also blame if that is the case, the heads of those agencies.
Depal, you are pushing. I don't know why.
I'm not really pushing. I'm asking.
I'm
just
not
asking
sure where you are
question.
coming from, because if we did our background research before we came to this program, this is what we would have found. That this is a road that has been under construction for the last 5 years. It's a 165-kilometer road coming from Dengu, joining Nyahururu Road, and joining Jafini. And it's actually constructed from Jafini to, we call it Kemakia in Gatanga. That road is already completed. And I've said I have used it to go to Jafini because we have some property across Nyandarua. Now, when you come from Cairo, which is the tipmost point in Muranga, that other thing is constructed. It is to a place called Thengu in Nyeri. It's all complete. Now, the 32 kilometer we are talking about is not about a new road. It is about refinancing. And it was raised by Kangema MP, Kihongi, about this rising of the money. In fact, it's about this budget, whether we will afford it or will not afford it. And it's not a new road that is being under constructed. Now, the big issue here is that you are not going to get earth movers moving to that area, moving soil, cutting trees, because this is a road that has been used for nearly 300 years. It is called Mau Mau Road because it is the road that our fathers and mothers used those years. And it has been used by huge number of people. Even today, if you're brave enough, you come from my place in Rwadia, you go to a place called Kanyenyeine, and you take that road through the forest. And it brings you to Kiambu, here at, near Sianda, around there. And then you come to Nairobi, it's about 30 kilometers. That's why it's popular. So the local MPs, the local leadership, governor, MP, everybody is in consensus that this road is good. It's a road we have used. So it's a question of tarmacking it. Now, we have this debate when we talk about parks, whether you can tarmac paths in the park, like in the Nairobi National Park. Can you do that tarmac? And in Nairobi National Park, they decided to tarmac part of the area because it is used by heavy transport. I mean, the environmental lobbyists would say no to that tarmacking. The same case with Tsavo, the same case with the Masai Mara and others. I think Kenyans need to take charge of their own development because we are the ones who know what is best for us. When we quote environmental lobbyists and then you decode them and find these are either NGOs that are funded by certain interests or they are certain scholars. Like we were looking at one study that was paid for to oppose the building of the SGR across the Nairobi National Park over. And already the government is saying we are not going to interfere with the park. It's in our interest. It's in our interest as a country not to interfere with the park. But it's also in our interest as a country to move people affordably, cheaply, and so on. So, one, this road is not new. Two, no new road is being paved through the forest. This is a road that has been used for hundreds of years by the local people. The big question is, do you tarmac it or don't you tarmac it?
Right, that's a big question.
Yes,
but
and the tarmacking has been done even in parks where environmental lobbyists are saying. I think I'll be more worried about whether or not roads, settlements can be allowed on the road. That's how we'll be aware. But already settlement exists. Cairo is there. It's not a new city. It's a no-done market. Cairo is there. Kemakia is there. And beyond Kemakia, in Gatanga, you cannot go up because that's forest.
Okay.
So,
I just want to, because as we're finalizing on it, it's not that I'm trying to beat down to the ground this particular issue, but I just want to ask critical concerns around it. It's very good because the 4.4 billion shillings upgrade of a road cutting through the Aberdares, a vital tower, was blocked. This is February 2020, blocked by the environment regulator NEMA, and it said it will have involved massive forest and moorland ecosystem disruption and cut through the habitat of many elephants It has more than
But is that true?
3,500 elephants. This is according
But
to
is that true?
This is according to NEMA.
Yeah, those are what we are calling propaganda. We cannot base
Not from the environmentalists.
No.
I mean, this is the agency that we go to as...
We are saying, I come from the area. I'm a native of the area. I come from near Tutho. And Tutho, we have walked on that road. I have personally driven on that road. The question is...
The upgrade of a road.
Do we upgrade it? Not upgrade, it's a tarmac. Because what is happening in our counties across the country is that we are moving from one level of the road to the other. Professor must have walked from his home to that road we are calling Mau Mau. There is nothing from where he comes from in Mugoiri. It's just a few kilometers walk into the forest. From where I live, I mean my home in Ruathia, to now the so-called Mau Mau Road is a walking distance, right? It's the Kanyenyene and then to the road. And you're not going to find a new road. It's an existing road, old, and that has been used by our great-grandparents.
All right.
So the idea that we are having a very new road coming up is a non-issue. It's a non-issue because the Robbies say, therefore we have to spend all of our airtime and everything discussing Robbies. This is a road our great-grandfathers have used.
No, we are not.
So,
I'm stoutly denying the fact that the lobbies are the ones who are saying this.
But we are quoting Robbies.
Me, I'm quoting the National Environment Management Authority, which is, mandated by our constitution to watch.
But when the road, the upgrading or whatever it is, and Professor said it's been there for about 5 years. So if you are going to question those who approved it that long time ago, did they do the right thing? And if they didn't, if they approved at the time and then disapproved afterwards, that's a different matter. But the project has been on. And when it was stopped for some strange reason, there was an uproar. What's going on? Yes, we may need to re-examine the agencies that we have to look after these things.
But the fact that it was stopped, it tells you there's a lot more than meets the eye that we're being.
It also says it's also political, eh?
It's also political. All right, let's leave it at that because I think Kagonja, because this is his home turf.
I have another solution. 15 kilometers, we can tunnel through it. And a lot of countries do that. That's also an option. We tunnel through it, and we get to the other side. It's even going to be shorter. It's just going to be a little bit more expensive, but that's a possibility. Yeah, and many advanced economies do that too, all the time.
All right.
Yeah.
I think Weshimua, just last time we were discussing about how the way we are having monkeys around us, having hyenas around us, the human-wildlife conflict that is happening currently. I know this can be numberingly boring, but allow me just to push it. Yes, they are here with us because we are felling the trees. They have no fruits to eat. They come seeking, I can see even from just my home area, we have one baboon that has to come and, look at the lock if I've locked the door to try and push it to come and get something from the house. I mean, this is the reality on the ground when it comes to the ecosystem that we're spoiling. But anyway, I think I've now beaten it to the ground and I can see you're now glossing your eyes. We move on. We want to go to Sudan, where Kenya will take over the mediation role in talks between the government of South Sudan and holdout groups that did not sign the 2018 peace agreement. President Salva Kiir last year requested Kenya to take over the Rome process, which has been initiated by a community of St. Egidio, a lay Catholic association. President Ruto said that Kenya is making the necessary arrangements to take over and have the process transferred to Nairobi on January the 27th. This is where the president also received a list of government delegates from President Kiir, delivered by Presidential Special Envoy Albino Abug in Nairobi. Now, during the Italy-Africa Summit in Rome, President Ruto held discussions with officials of St. Egidio and said Nairobi will also work closely with the former mediators. Right, let's just begin on that particular note. It seems that it's really gone a full circle. This is where it began with the peace process, and now it's coming back home. Has President Kiir learned something about the entire peace process, and given now where we are at as a country with frosty relations that we have ruffled feathers, Tanzania, I think also Sudan, what does this really portend? Does it bring a new life that we have also Salva Kiir as the chair of the East African community? Dr. Hassan Kanenja, let's begin with you.
Well, Kenya is a second home for a lot of South Sudanese, people, politicians, business people. Many of them live in this town, and you can see the number plates, their cars everywhere you go. They just tend to be a little bit fancier than our average Kenyans. It means they know house one or two things about car selection, but that's a topic for another day. Now, it's not just that it has little to do with the fact that, what we mentioned in terms of ruffling feathers. This ruffling feathers has not exactly been intentional. Some of it has been accidental. Some of it has been a few missteps that sometimes along the way, we've encountered as a country. But when you go to the comprehensive peace agreement and the role that Kenya played, and the role that Kenya has continuously played, it perhaps more than most countries has a lot of confidence when it comes to key players within South Sudan. And the agreement you're talking about is the revitalized agreement, which a lot of us have been concerned that has never been implemented in full, and that may affect the possibility or the prospect of actually South Sudan even moving towards an eventual transition. You cannot have a transition, have an election without fully implementing the revitalized agreement. Now, it is timely, and I would like perhaps to congratulate President Kiir for having thought about that and being ready to actually move the vehicle forward, perhaps also informed by the responsibility of being the EAC boss, at least this year, and recognizing that certain things need to move along, because without undertaking the finalization of that agreement, South Sudan remains on a precipice. There is still a lot of groups that are armed and a lot of groups that have not come on board. And even between the major groups, of course, there are lots of things that still need to be ironed. Now, someone may ask, why now? Because the region seems to be in a state of flux, whether it's in Sudan or what's happening, in the tensions in the region within the Horn of Africa itself. But there is no good time to try and make peace. Every time is going to be a good time and right time to try and make peace. Because if Kenya can be able to reinvest itself in South Sudan, considering the current, the kind of environment or climate where South Sudanese parties, and I'm hoping parties from the other groups are going to be willing to see Kenya as a neutral broker, then we can invest in ensuring that the losses that Kenya has encountered with the outbreak of conflict in 2013 in South Sudan, can be able to be reclaimed. Remember, Kenya suffered extensively in terms of business, but also in terms of the projects, including the LAPSET projects, which was actually tied to the stability of South Sudan. And we know, of course, what has happened with that, in part because of that conflict. And so it is actually in Kenya's national interest to ensure that South Sudan is peaceful. But right now, as the region stands, there are few countries that will have credibility in South Sudan, like Kenya does. Now, the question is, are we prepared with the personnel, the capacity, the technical expertise, and the commitment and resources, as well as the diplomatic wherewithal to see this process through? We know how complicated and how arduous a task it can be, especially when you're trying to negotiate peace in South Sudan. Any involvement in it is going to mean that we fully commit ourselves to doing that, because there are going to be challenges along the way. But at the same time, without losing sight of what is happening in our neighborhood. For instance, our own active role in Sudan. Right now, we know the state of IGAD in relation to Sudan mediation. Two, we have another potential tension, and conflict coming up within the Horn of Africa, especially between Mogadishu and Addis Ababa. Within Addis itself, while one part we were able to assist in reaching peace, there's still trouble, especially coming from the Hara region as well as other groups. So, as Kenya, do we have a regional strategy, and are we prepared? Because unfortunately or fortunately, the world and the region looks up to us to play a more instrumental and a more robust role in these engagements. Now, this is not just that we'll be doing our neighbors a favor, it is actually in our national economic interest. Our economic policy, our regional policy is tied to a national interest, which is economic prosperity and regional security, because that is what's going to guarantee our own security. Our banks, our supermarkets left South Sudan because of the conflict. The same may happen if other countries start falling apart. Now, with South Sudan being part of the East African community, it becomes incumbent upon us to actually play a more instrumental role. But what we need, first and foremost, is build capacity. That is not, we just don't have to send the same people everywhere because they can't do that. Do we have a team for country A, country B, country C that are going to be dedicated in ensuring that thing takes place? Two, for South Sudan, now that they are re-engaging again, how are we going to go about it? Where will that kind of discussion be taking place? How is the format going to look like? Who else, regionally and externally, should be part of that process? Because if we don't have a comprehensive analysis and approach to these interventions, unfortunately, it becomes very hard, because it's not just that we're passionate about peace. We need a sound strategy and policy for our peace diplomacy in the region.
Right. Peter Kagwanja, it seems like it's become a holy grail when we are looking at the quest for peace in South Sudan. And many people have been proposing that maybe it's a high time that we have a generation exit that will bring sort of new, fresh, young faces with a new perspective. Because if you have the old mindset, they always say that if you have a crooked mind, or you'll always have a crooked view. So maybe the view has become crooked because the mindset is still stuck with the old settings.
Well, let's start by observing that South Sudan has been a paradox. It's Africa's youngest nation, but also one of the most unstable since 2011, when it got its independence. And you remember, Kenya was very, very crucial. It was a pivotal player in the emergence of South Sudan, to the point that it can be said that the Sudan mainly did not forgive Kenya for allowing the breakup, because perhaps it is assumed that without Kenya and Uganda, possibly South Sudan would have had it difficult to become an independent nation. And it's not a surprise when they were going home, they went with the Kenyan flag, only to realize that this is a foreign flag. You need to have some uniqueness, and they put some colors. But it's like when when the two flags are flying, they are the same: Kenya flag and South Sudan flag. It tells you about the mix of the two elites, the Kenyan elite and the the South Sudanese elite. We very, very closely intermixed. I remember we were in South Africa and we were training the Southern Sudan just before independence in 2011. It was around 2005 and 2011. And the representative that flight was a friend of mine called John Yo. And he came and whispered to me, the Sudanese delegation want to see the ambassador. We want the ambassador to host us. But the delegation of eight people was hosted by South Africa within the framework of what they were calling the tripartite arrangement between the University of South Africa, the South African government, and South Sudan. So Kenya had nothing to do with this. But essentially they insisted that they need to be hosted by the ambassador. Mm-hmm. And I remember when Salva Kiir came in, that time he was the deputy to John Garang, he said, they removed their shoes, literally, and said, "We have come home." And it was a very, very interesting evening for me. Kenya is deeply engraved in the minds of South Sudanese, and we've invested a lot as a country in not just stabilizing it, but building the capacity for South Sudan. I have personally participated in training the diplomats, training the administration. Our Kenya School of Government has been very key in doing exactly that. And that is what we call the post-conflict reconstruction. And post-conflict reconstruction of Sudan also means about reconciling some of the forces that may not have come into the fold in this regard. Such Kenyan politicians and notables have also made their name. They have basically broken their teeth in international mediation. Kalonzo Musyoka, our former vice president, has been an envoy in Sudan for a long time, mediating this, and he has written, I think his biography has partly to do with that. You remember Azara Sobeyo and his autobiography? So it tells you that this is not really the beginning, it's a continuation of what we're going on. Why is this important now? It is important because in December this year, South Sudan is going to hold its first democratic election, if it takes off. Because other elections are being postponed. You've seen in Senegal and elsewhere they're being postponed. But the South Sudan, the election in South Sudan, President Salva Kiir has said it is going on, has given his word. He will definitely be a candidate. Has not ruled that it might happen that he ruled out being a candidate. But it's going to hold its election. And it's important that this election is held in an environment which will guarantee stability after the election. And this peace talk, I would imagine, are going to contribute to this process of stabilizing South Sudan. A stable South Sudan is a huge economic benefit for Kenya. You remember before December 2013, when the current civil war broke out, a number of Kenyan investors were in the country, and it was estimated that some of them were drawing 25% of their total profit from South Sudan. It was already in record. 25% of their profit from South Sudan. So when the upset was being imagined, it was not a railway to nowhere. It was not a road to nowhere. This was a road to South Sudan, because South Sudan is the new northern frontier for Kenya's growth. It is a new Kiswahili language. Most of our teachers have gone there to teach. Most of our engineers have gone there for construction. So in terms of external employment, South Sudan has been a major area. So the mediation, I guess, should go on, because should South Sudan stabilize and get to where it was by 2013, then Kenya stands to benefit.
Right. Let's hear from Honorable Yusuf Hassan. Also, in light of the Juba Agreement, we know that the Juba Agreement sought to amend the 2019 Constitution. So if we have this coming to Nairobi, how do we consider these instruments of peace agreements that also have been there before, especially even with the Juba Agreement? I don't know.
Well, I think I would start by saying that this is a very important development for South Sudan, because there are two major parties to the conflict at the heart of the South Sudanese conflict. South Sudan has been torn apart by the power struggle between two big figures and two political party movements that have been at play during the South Sudan struggle for independence. And at one hand is Salva Kiir, the president, and his party, the SPLM, the historic movement that.
Salva Kiir.
And then there's the Riek Machar. So, I think these two groups and two personalities have reached the end of the road. It now appears that, in fact, they understand that there is no winner in this violent confrontation. And South Sudan is on its knees. And this is what, under mediation parlor, is known, we're seeing the concept of ripeness, that this particular conflict is led to mutually hurting between the two, stalemate between the two parties. And now they are ready to have their problem discussed and resolved through political means, by peaceful means. And I think they are seeking an alternative to the damaging conflict that has paralyzed South Sudan this many years. And in addition to that, the conflict, the civil war in Sudan has also impacted this particular decision, because South Sudan is virtually paralyzed because there's no economic movement. The oil is not moving sufficiently to Port Sudan, which is the main export port for South Sudan's oil. And so the only alternative now is also Mombasa becomes a very important, and the concept of Lamu. So I think these two parties are ready. The opportunity is there, and Kenya is best placed to do this particular job, because we have the history of mediation and peacemaking all these years, and we have played a big role in both South Sudan's resolution of the South Sudanese problem, as well as the Somalia conflict. And I think we're equipped as well. And so this is a great opportunity for us to be able to play that regional role and to be able to resolve. And I think it is most likely that this particular mediation would resolve in success, in the sense that, in fact, there isn't a direct confrontation between these two leaders at the moment. The South Sudanese civil war is not active. It is at a stalemate. And what is needed now is to bring these two leaders either to work out a coalition agreement, a power sharing agreement, and to lay the foundation for how the next elections could be held in a peaceful and stable environment. So I think this is a very good opportunity for Kenya to show its ability and its capability to be able to mediate successfully for an issue that it has been dealing with for so many years. And I hope that it will work out very well for both South Sudan and for Kenya, because the stability of South Sudan would be an enormous economic, political advantage for the whole region.
Indeed.
Yeah, and it will be a win-win situation for the East African region.
So with this particular development as well, do you see, because they had indicated this year will be the year that they'll be holding the general election. So is there any light at the end of the tunnel? Seeing the realization of an election in Sudan this year, South Sudan?
That's precisely why I mentioned the criticality of having those talks, because you cannot proceed to an election without settling the kind of difference that exists, without building capacity for actually an independent electoral body to conduct elections. Because right now that is missing. We need to have a body in place that is going, and a mechanism, but also build capacity for that body to conduct elections that are going to be accepted. We understand how contentious and competing interests are in South Sudan. And while many people are familiar with the two protagonists, the main ones, there are a lot more than just two protagonists. And so if, for instance, in the next 3 or 4 months, a deal can be struck between both the main protagonists as well as others, then it can create some room, even though that time will not be sufficient to be able to undertake registration, ensure that people are going to, to vote. And so what we are seeing a likelihood is, well, we're hoping this is not a delay game. And there is a likelihood that actually this election may be postponed to a later date, of course, which is not the preferable path. But when under the current circumstances, a country of 11 million people, is going to take a while and is vast. What I think Kenyans might not sometimes understand is, geographically, South Sudan is still bigger than Kenya, and so, but it barely has infrastructure to even move things or move around. So it's going to take a whole lot more effort to actually be able to put infrastructure just to be able to conduct a free and fair election that is going to give access to everybody. And so the sooner these talks begin, the better. But if they're going to delay, it's going to be extremely difficult for South Sudan to conduct election this year. But if a mechanism that is mutually agreed on to postpone an election perhaps by a couple of months, then of course that is something perhaps that the region may support. But we should not be too optimistic and then tie the parties to hold elections in June or December when we actually know they're not exactly prepared, because whatever the outcome will be rejected by those losers.
Thank you. Right. Let's move on to Somalia, unless there is anything that you want to add on that particular development so far.
I need to make a comment on
Please.
that.
Yes. On Somalia.
No.
On South Sudan, yes.
Yes. Kenya was critical to the creation of South Sudan. Without Kenya, it would not have been there. And it considered it so important, the independence, that when we were inaugurating a new constitution, you invited Bashir here. Why did we do that? Because it was in Kenya's interest that South Sudan becomes independent. And Omar Bashir was in a position to block it. So you treat him well, and he says, okay, it will go on. There are people who complained about it at that time, but it made a lot of sense to some of us. The other thing is, Kenya and South Sudan did not think of the consequences of success. What would happen when this happens? That failed. I think General Sombayo admitted this. There was failure to think of the consequences of success, the independence. And so some of the problems we saw and we see in South Sudan is because there had not been long-term thinking of what happens when this happens. Now, the good thing right now is the neglected peoples in South Sudan are being given a chance to feel involved in the discussions. Because at the time it was mainly a few big ones talking about themselves and neglecting the others. So the opportunity to bring the others to be part of the discussion is critical. And for Kenya to be asked, I think it's very good for Kenya to be given that honor, to be more inclusive. I remember there was a suggestion at the time that South Sudan, well, it was very raw. It needed to have a national dialogue. And the suggestion was made of all the peoples of Southern Sudan to have a dialogue on what it is that they would want, what it is they should expect, without saying that only a few people or a few leaders, and a national dialogue. For some reason, the idea was dumped. But it would have been very useful at the time if all the South Sudanese were to have that national dialogue, every group. It did not happen. Instead, within a short time, we had Salva Kiir and Riek quarreling. And that has been the story. Salva and Riek quarreling. The rest, ignored. So the opportunity now, and it's good honor for Kenya, is to see whether we can deal with some of these issues and think of the consequences of the likely success and deal with it now so that everyone knows.
All right, thank you.
Yeah,
Yes,
I remember actually just towards the end of the period when South Sudan was about to become independent. I was with the United Nations, and we had met John Garang at the UN headquarters in New York. And he had said that, in fact, that South Sudan was not prepared to go quickly for independence. That it would have been in the best interest of both the North and the South to have a democratic government that accepts all the rights of the Sudanese people as equals. And his departure, his unexpected departure from the political scene, laid the foundation, obviously, for some of the problems that South Sudan is facing now. And we went to Addis and with the UN delegation, and the Prime Minister of Ethiopia at that time, Meles Zenawi, said that there was really no need to rush. South Sudan was now autonomous. It was running its own affairs. it should be allowed to stabilize and build institutions before we push it to become fully independent. But he said Kenya and Uganda were pushing South Sudan to become independent immediately. And unfortunately, he said, these two countries, because of their own self-interest, were setting South Sudan for failure. So I think if you look at these aspects, there were a lot of things that had gone terribly wrong at the very beginning when South Sudan was taking off, as the professor has mentioned now, about the issue of national dialogue. Because a lot of the African leaders had accepted that SPLM was the mother and the father of the new country, and that no any other force could be allowed to represent their voice and rock the boat. There was nobody ready for that. So I think this particular mediation in Nairobi offer an opportunity really for South Sudan to look back and fix some of the problems that may have come up, and at the same time to bring others on board as well.
So the splinter now of Sudan and the South Sudan, that should not have been the case as the prime solution to actually end the conflict, because there was a tearing rush, so to speak, if I may hear you well,
yes,
to create this particular nation. But something will have been done between Sudan and South Sudan. So yeah, because it appears that there has not been any tapering away of the conflicts.
If I have worked in South Sudan, I have traveled extensively. It is seriously underdeveloped. It didn't have any of the institutions any of the African countries had when they became independent. They had a kind of an African colonial system, which did not allow for much development. Mm-hmm. So one could say that they were not really well prepared, although some people may argue, how can you be prepared to take the destiny of your country in your own hands? But it was very poorly prepared. I was there when we did the referendum with the United Nations, where I was working, had played a pivotal role. You could see that, in fact, people were not ready. They didn't know what was happening. They knew that a big change was coming, but they didn't have the institutions, they didn't have the policies, they didn't have the strategy. And the idea of the winner takes it all, SPLM is the main thing, also was a mistake in some ways. For a fragile new country like South Sudan, you probably would look for consensus to bring everybody on board, so that you have a united front and you focus on the dire situation that particular country is facing, which was not the case in the case of South Sudan. So maybe this is a second chance for it to put their act together and to be able to do a proper election and create the conditions for a durable and a stable environment for the people of South Sudan.
Right. I wonder how Kanenja will react to what when you say, in a way, I don't know, in a very subtle way, or in a very nuanced way, that Kenya also exacerbated what is happening in South Sudan, because also we had our own interest at the end of the day. So we really pushed the envelope for having a young nation in Sudan. Do you hold with this view?
Well, I was not in the policy-making circles, so I did not know what was going through their mind. However...
No, but I mean, there is just direct. Do you hold with this view? What do you really say?
Kenya and Uganda have always had interest in South Sudan. And as we indicated earlier, even the entire LAPSE project was based on ability to be able to do business with South Sudan. We know that traditionally, since Northern Sudan is not exactly, don't have a border with us per se, so South Sudan is a natural, member of the community. We had good relations and we had hosted them here for a very long time. So I will not be surprised if that is going to be an interest of Kenya to make sure that they are free people. But not to mention, if we have to be honest, this is also a group that had suffered extensively for many years. And there is sometimes an identification with the desire to be free, considering our own history. And so there was a lot more sympathy for South Sudanese people, not just from those in policy-making circles, but actually from the population in Kenya. So while I cannot ascertain as a fact, I would not be surprised if that was in fact some of the thinking that informed Kenya's support for South Sudan. Even though I must add that Kenya generally, even though that was maybe apparent in certain circles, was also seen to be a very neutral country. And that's part of the reason why they were accepted by both Khartoum as well as Juba in the CPA that led to the kind of progress. Clearly, South Sudan was not anywhere near being prepared to be independent. The institutions, not only were they very nascent, in many places they were non-existent. But the constitution itself, which some of us argued, that created technically two centers of power, was faulty because it was setting up South Sudan for conflict. And that is one thing that we saw actually happening, and it didn't take long. In fact, it didn't even take complete 2 years, for it to erupt, because we had seen that coming. But because of the euphoria and the desire to have freedom and to see South Sudan becoming independent, we were caught up in that kind of euphoria, and I think we may have made a few missteps as a region, not just as Kenya, but also some international players who are also very enthusiastic to see South Sudan become independent.
All right, we want to take a short break right now. Peter Kawanja, you wanted to say something before we take that break?
Yes, I wanted to add to this debate by simply saying, when I listen to our contribution here, it reads like David Lamb, the Africans. and his very cynical description of how Djibouti became independent. That the local woman who was supplying water did not know that independence was coming. I was told independence is coming tomorrow. Oh, what is that? I think many of them thought it's a train from some place. That's how cynical these presentations are. I remember on the eve of independence of South Sudan, I was with my friend, Abdallah Hamdok in Addis Ababa. I was going to do research in the Sudan, and therefore I needed his networks to help me in doing that. And when he was seeing me off, he told me, Peter, you will be among the last people to see Sudan as the largest African country. It was prescient because it came out to pass that is true. But this emphasis on Kenya and Uganda as the people who made it possible, or pushed for South Sudan independent vis-a-vis what Meles wanted is sometimes overplayed. The truth of the matter is that Sudan, meaning Khartoum, did not make the union attractive to the South Sudanese. That's what the Sudanese elite will tell you, that Sudan, that is Omar al-Bashir and his people, did not make the union with the South attractive. And therefore, the South decided to go its own way. That's the main argument.
All right. We are due for a station break. When we circle back, we look at Somali and what is happening right now in Somali. We have, of course, information coming to hand, and we know it right now that there were several blasts at a popular open market in Somalia capital Mogadishu that killed at least 10 people and left many others injured on Tuesday. And we want to interrogate the issue of